All right, let's begin. We have seen from chapter 1 that the Lord is controlling Daniel's life and he is escorting Daniel right through these trials. Daniel, in turn, is calling upon the Lord to help him and is showing this other heathen nation, as well as the other Israelites who cease to call upon the Lord, that there is no other God but the Almighty, eternal God of Israel. Now, in prayer requests, this was mentioned that there are work situations that are out of our control, that there are visitor and family situations that are out of our control. We have to give these things to the Lord. And that's why I love hearing when people are like, we're just going to just take it and just give it to God. Just give it to God. That's what Daniel's doing. He's in this very difficult situation and he's just giving it to God. Just take it. Lord, I don't want to control it. I can't control it. Just do what you do. And so he is reminding Israel who God was, and he's showing this heathen nation, Babylon, who God is. We are beautifully told in the book of Deuteronomy. This is one of my top 20s. I say that. I probably have 150 scriptures in my top 20. This is truly one of my top 20, Deuteronomy 4:7. That the Lord is God. He's described as a faithful God who keeps covenant with those who love him and keep his commandments. Ironically enough, what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, that whenever we call upon him, he's there. So fantastic reminder that God is close to his covenant people. When we call upon him, he's there. He has this attachment with those who are faithful. And so we see that in Deuteronomy 4:7. Unfortunately, so few people today, and even in Daniel's time, are really found doing this. All the people that we know, it's probably a small percentage of people who actually take the time and effort, have the understanding and the appreciation of giving things to God. It's probably not many. It's probably a smaller percentage of those who do versus those who don't. And so I wish this was a lesson everyone could learn, to just give things to God. Daniel was just giving things to God. Here you go, God. You take it. It's yours. Whatever you want from this situation. I'm in Babylon. I'm in the king's palace. I was viewed as attractive and a quick learner. You have to go from there because I don't even know what that means. And so God is going to take it from there. We're going to see God's work in chapter 2. Unfortunately, so few people are doing this, but there weren't that many people doing it in Daniel's time either. Daniel, as we should, knew this verse and kept his end of the deal. Daniel served God, so God, blessed and protected Daniel throughout his life. The entire time, Nebuchadnezzar thinks he's working his purpose with Daniel and the other Hebrew children, but God, in his infinite wisdom and knowledge, is working behind the scenes to accomplish his purpose. That's where God loves to work. He loves to show that he's God, but in the meantime, he's working over here. And that's what we love to see. We love to know and have faith in God that he's working what he does over here while life is going on. The timeline continues. God is working what he does. And we see that. I mean, we've experienced it in our lives. I know you have too, where God is working. You may not know how, you may not know why, you may not know when, but God is working. And God is always working behind the scenes to accomplish his will. So Nebuchadnezzar thinks he's rallied all the troops. He's rallied the kids. He's going to indoctrinate them and put them under the flag of good-looking young men to join the army and learn the way of the Chaldeans and all that. Nope. God's working behind the scenes to accomplish his purpose. So this plan continues in chapter 2. So let's read. So this is Daniel chapter 2, verse 1 through 6 on this page. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. The king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to him, I have had a dream. My spirit is anxious to know the dream. And the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation." Nice try. But that's what they wanted. And I'm sure that they had done that with the king before. We're going to find out a little bit of background of these guys. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, "My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation." So I'm going to ask Katie. Katie, what was your mom's dream last night? And can you interpret what it means? It's impossible, right? It's impossible. It's an impossible task. The king is asking an impossible task, and he's talking to swindling, swashbuckling magicians. And we're going to see a few, Penn and Teller, who think that they can, that if you just give them the dream, if you give me the context of something, I'll come up with an interpretation. Anyone can do that, right? If your mom was like, "Hey, yeah, I dreamt that we were in a field and we were running and we saw Brad Pitt and we ran to him." Okay, well, I could come up with something there. But how about tell me what the dream was, or I'm going to cut you into pieces and set your houses on fire. Okay. They answered again and said, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation." The king answered and said, "I know for certain that you would gain time because you see that my decision is firm," meaning you're stalling. "If you do not make known the dream to me, there's only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation." And the Chaldeans, they follow up. They know exactly what's up. They say, "Look, king, there's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh." For this reason, the king was angry and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Oof. It's a tough task. This is not an easy task. It's an impossible one, in fact. And so we're going to see how this played out. The Lord gives Nebuchadnezzar a dream. How do we know it was the Lord who gave him this dream? Because it was Yahweh and his servant alone who had the interpretation. The dream was about the future, but we don't know that yet, but yet Nebuchadnezzar didn't know it. It is future for Kingdom of Babylon and shows who will come in after them on the world stage and as the dominant power. Again, we're going to get into all this. This is the back half of chapter 2. This is probably a few weeks that we're going to spend on this dream. And so right now we're seeing the impossibility of man interpreting something that God has put out there. This is yet to be discovered because he is so disturbed by this dream that he's unable to sleep the rest of the evening. In fact, the Bible says his spirit was troubled. The next morning, the king calls to himself the wisest men to assist him with interpreting the dream. The Bible repeatedly calls them the wise people of Babylon, meaning these people already had a reputation. Their jobs were to do this sort of thing. Now, there's a few people that are listed. So here's who's listed. Magicians. These magicians were a class of occult practitioners in Babylon, known as Hartimim in Hebrew. The term literally means engravers or writers, suggesting they used inscriptions, charms, and chants in their occult practices. These magicians claimed to have secret knowledge and powers, likely involving sorcery and astrology. Now, there's going to be a theme. We've already talked about this with Babylon, that they are big into this. They're big into astrology. They're big into the moon. They're big into signs in the earth, many gods, all of that. And so we see a lot of sorcery and astrology happening, that these magicians always claim to have these secret powers. They would attempt to interpret dreams and omens. These magicians were seen as possessing mystical abilities through their writings and spells, transforming things or creating illusions. Typical magician, right? Even back to Houdini. These guys are always sort of, it's a sleight of hand. It's sort of trickery. In this case, all of these that are mentioned have some sort of astrological background. It's about looking into the stars and reading the stars. There's a term today that came from this type of group. I'm going to give it to the universe, or I'm going to see what the universe has to say about it. It's this idea that there's this nebulous concept that's out there that's going to answer your question. It's the universe. I'm going to put it out to the universe in the hopes that it comes back. This is the roots of this, is this mysticism when it comes to space. Okay. Space is simply something God created. And yet it's mysticism that's out there. And so people try to tap, because there's no definition to it, so you can define what it means. You can define the astrological terms. Has anyone ever seen like the constellations? Those look nothing like what they say they do. The only one that does is Orion's belt. Like that looks like a belt. Okay. But like there's like 5 stars and they say it looks like a horse. I don't know. Like, I don't know where they come up with this, but they have, and people really tie themselves to this. Astrologers. Ashephem in Hebrew were stargazers, dividers of the heavens, pretending to foretell what would happen by observing the stars. Astrology was very widely practiced among heathen nations. Now remember, Babylon is, did you ever play the game Hungry Hungry Hippos? Remember that game, Hungry Hungry Hippos? Awesome game. The hippo would just gobble up all the marbles, right? You would try to get as many marbles. And when I would play with my brothers, I would pin theirs down as I would claw the other marbles. I'd pin theirs down. They didn't like that. But that's what Babylon was doing. They were gobbling up all these different faiths, all these different ways, all these different religions and mysticisms and gods and things. And so they grabbed bits and pieces and sort of formulated it. As the dominant group, they could do that. They could pick and choose sort of from different elements of places that they gobbled up. These were occult practitioners who claimed to foretell the future or gain hidden knowledge through studying the stars and celestial bodies. So again, through astrology. They claimed to interpret dreams using celestial signs and astrological knowledge to do so. They still exist today, acting as if there are hidden messages in the stars that can be discovered. Many times, lots of effort is wasted on the ungodly use of astrology to predict each person's day, called a horoscope. We talked about this a little bit last week. Self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say this, and this is going to happen today, there's a good chance you're going to find a way to make it happen. Okay? And so that's why it's dangerous to play with this stuff. It's dangerous to tinker with this horoscope. People have made, it's a billions and billions of dollar industry, and it just takes the focus off of God. It puts random chance into the universe in the hopes that something lands. It's just playing dice. And so that takes God completely out of it. The creator of all of this, it takes him completely out of it. The sorcerers were fortune tellers, supposing to have power with evil forces. This term is derived from the root word kashhaf, which means to practice sorcery or to use magic formulas and incantations. Their practice included the use of herbs, charms, various potions, mixing drugs, medical compounds. You see a lot of this really hit its peak. This was definitely a peak time, but you see a lot of this during medieval times. You see quite a bit of this happening where there were witches and spells, and that's where the witch was a big cauldron doing this and all that. It was a lot during that time. That's when we see a lot of this sort of hit its peak. Did anyone actually ever call Miss Cleo? No, good. Okay, don't admit it if you did. They invoked the aid of spirits or deities through their incantations and rituals. Okay, that includes Oda Mae Brown. Okay, the great Oda Mae Brown from Ghost. These were often experts in drugs and drug use and tapped into evil forces using Ouija board types of items to dazzle and amaze. I'm not going to ask if you played with a Ouija board as a kid. Pastor's kid, of course, we were never allowed, but there's always this sort of just evil vibe to it. There's just sort of this evil force. Well, these sorcerers were the ones who sort of tapped into that evil force, wanted to call upon the spirits and try to interpret things through these evil spirits. So, best supporting actress, though, that year. So, that was a pretty good year. The Chaldeans. Okay, these were priests of Bel, which is a heathen god. Men of exceptional wisdom and knowledge in tradition and ritual, using such as a basis of foretelling the future and interpreting dreams and strange happenings. They would track different dreams, write them down. Daniel was trained in this, as his Chaldean name implied, as a prince of Bel, someone who was involved in this type of practice. So Daniel was coached in this. That's why when Nebuchadnezzar says, kill all the wise men, that would include Daniel and his friends. They were involved in this with their name changes, which we looked at a couple weeks ago. Here's some more information about the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were an ancient people who inhabited the region of southern Babylonia, which is modern-day southern Iraq. They were originally a semi-nomadic tribe that settled in the cities of southern Babylonia, including the city of Ur, where Abraham was. We see that in the book of Genesis 11:28, where it talks about the land of his nativity in the Ur of the Chaldeans. And then in verse 31, it says, Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law his son, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. Over time, the Chaldeans became the dominant ethnic group and the ruling class in the Babylonian Empire, producing kings like Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar. In the book of Isaiah, the term Chaldeans is sometimes used interchangeably with Babylonians to refer to the people of that region and of the empire. Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, and again, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon, sit on the ground, there's no throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans. Sort of used interchangeably. The Chaldeans, though, were sort of the more educated ones, and as I said, more the ruling class. They were the ones who had the prominent. Remember, only really those who had the money to be educated could be educated. And so they were the ones who were in the ruling class of the Babylonians. Chaldeans were very influential, highly educated group of people. I just picture them as sort of the elite today. The sort of upper, I hate this term, the upper crust. I don't know, who came up with that? That's bread, right? And I prefer no crust, Uncrustables, or whatever they're called. Give me some of those. The upper echelon of people, the people who sort of look down on others and say, we are great. So within Babylonia and the Babylonian Empire, the Chaldeans were more of the educated upper class. The elite, these sort of Pelosi's of their time, these sort of Bidens of their time. At the time of Daniel, Babylon was the intellectual center of Western Asia, and the Chaldeans were renowned for their knowledge and practice of occult arts, including this astrology, divination, and sorcery. The last king of Babylon, Belshazzar, is referred to as the king of the Chaldeans, highlighting their ruling status in that empire. Now we're going to see him in chapter 5 when we see the writing on the wall. So we're going to see the Medes and Persians take them over. We'll get to that in chapter 5. They kept detailed astronomical records for over 360 years, which can help us understand how the wise men from the east would have been able to recognize and follow the star that would lead them to the king. And we see that in Matthew chapter 2. Again, there's just that influence, this gazing up at stars, this sort of tracking star. They saw the star, they followed it. They were well aware of this process, including this record keeping of dreams and astrology. Okay, by asking these groups of people to help interpret the dream, he is now forgotten. He is soliciting the help of those who relied on human wisdom. Human wisdom won't get you far with God. If this is a dream from God, who's going to be able to interpret? Back to Katie's example. Katie can't interpret what happened. You have no clue. Where do you even begin? In a field running toward Brad Pitt. Maybe that's where you begin. But wherever you begin, it may or may not be way off. You might be onto something. But we're talking about his request, his demand to first replay the dream to him and then interpret what it meant. Where do you start? Where do you start? And so human wisdom is not going to get you far with God. We see this in many verses. Oh, the depth and riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. My speech and my proclamation were not with persuasive words of wisdom, but with a powerful demonstration by the Spirit, so that your faith might not be based on men's wisdom, but on God's power. That's the only way this gets interpreted. It was a dream from God. He's going to use this Gentile king. Blessed be the name of the Lord forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. So you're going to see this later on in Daniel. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. And so we see clearly an indication that true wisdom really does come from God and God alone. Paul says, the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. We're about to see that. In fact, I'm going to later on mention Moses as an example. Remember, those were people in the 10 plagues who were trying to replicate what God was doing through Moses and Aaron, and they couldn't do it. And so God's about to shame the wisdom of man. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom didn't know God. The world through their wisdom. They're wise. Look at all this stuff. This AI thing is crazy. The internet is crazy. Even the telephone. How do telephones work? People would ask me all the time, how does television work? Like what does it mean? How does it get out there? How does something from a camera here go all the way out to, and even an invention like that is so, it's wise. It's impressive, the inventions and things that man can come up with, but yet God calls it foolishness because they haven't taken this and related it to God. They're doing it for themselves, for their own pleasure. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom didn't know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. Because really the foolishness, the message of the cross is foolishness to the world. Right? People don't want to hear the message of the cross. They don't want to hear about Christ. They don't want to hear about his church. To them, it's foolish. For Jews request a sign and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews, it's a stumbling block because of who he was. And to the Greeks, it's foolishness because the Greeks are wise. They're full of wisdom and they're philosophizers and they're sort of back and forth and trying to interpret things and come up with new knowledge. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. That's who their wisdom is, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Right? God's little pinky is stronger than anything man could ever do. And so we see Paul articulating that in Corinthians. You may ask yourself, why would God use a pagan king who's not part of the covenant does not serve him to foretell things to come. Well, God no longer had Israel as that medium to give the information to. He chose Nebuchadnezzar and dreams specifically to reveal things to come. This was a new era with the Babylonian Empire and Nebuchadnezzar. In the beginning of this era, God would still have his people, but also used other means to foretell events to come. God communicated by dreams, thus his revelation to Nebuchadnezzar. He had no problem calling upon these groups to attempt to interpret the dream, but was unable to recall what the dream was. He masked this by proclaiming that he would not reveal what the dream was, but required that these groups of wise people needed to tell him what he had dreamed. So he didn't remember. He wanted them to tell him, hey, you tell me what I dreamt, and then interpret it. And so it was a way to sort of protect the king. Clearly, by the reaction of Nebuchadnezzar, there was an already existing suspicion of these men because of past interpretations. When he goes from, you better tell me or I'm burning your houses down and I'm going to cut you to pieces, there was clearly already some difficulty there, some challenges with these people. And so there's already some pre-existing suspicion. These guys are sort of blowing smoke with the king and not, maybe not as accurate, or sort of, well, tell me a little bit more about this dream, and then sort of coming up with a story. Usually it was to placate the king and his greatness, I'm sure. He was very quick to charge them with a lack of integrity. They had the opportunity to prove themselves accurate if they were able to do the impossible and reveal this forgotten dream. Being the miserable buzzards that they were, they tried to escape this dilemma by pleading the absurdity and the impossibility of this. King, no one could do this. We're miserable buzzards. Love that term. I got to use that more. These were miserable buzzards. No one, it's impossible what you're asking. We can't do that. No one can do that. As if the king would relent. All right, here's the dream. He's not going to do that. He's testing them on this. And obviously God's hand is in all of this, because once again, as God's working behind the scenes, he's going to usher in Daniel, who's going to interpret this with ease. They were right when they said there's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. No one from this earth would have been able to know what he had dreamed, except for the one who gave King Nebuchadnezzar this dream. Remember, Pharaoh's magicians in Exodus could only keep up with Moses for so long until their limitations were shown. They were trapped in their own human deficiencies, and they claimed that no king had ever asked such things to be explained. Most kings would have accepted the declarations of their wise men for fear of supernatural reprisal if they did not. They tell the king that if he simply relayed the dream to him, they'd have a wonderful interpretation for him. This wasn't okay. He figured if they were able to interpret a dream, they were able to tell him what he dreamed. Nebuchadnezzar's anger is aroused. He becomes quite furious. The decree goes out to kill all the wise men in Babylon. Some were killed. This, of course, included Daniel and his 3 companions. Verse 13 said the Babylonian army sought to kill them too, included in this group. So we will now end and begin verse 14 next week. And we'll keep plugging along in chapter 2.